So Project Veritas, who I usually take with a can of salt, but they put out some videos today about this staffer for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I think the guy's name is Kyle Jurek, and he was talking about, first off, he was apologizing for the gulags. He was talking about how a lot of Americans will need re-education, particularly, Nazis. Now, what does he mean by Nazis? Who knows? But if I recall correctly, he said something like, yeah, that's why Bernie's plan to invest more in education, that's why it's important. It's for, we got to re-educate a lot of Americans to get on board with socialism. He says that's what happened in the gulags. And he was apologizing for the gulags, saying, yeah, the gulags, they played a huge role in re-education, and they paid their workers a decent wage in the gulags in the Soviet Union. And then he also said, yeah, these billionaires who are living so high and hoarding their wealth, we're going to bring them into the gulags so that they can do some hard work, so that they can understand what being working class really means. But then he also said that if Bernie Sanders loses, especially if the Democratic Party screws Bernie again, then cities will burn. They're gonna bring about a revolution, you guys. So it sounds like we have some communists in the Bernie Sanders. Not to sound all Joseph McCarthy, but sounds like there are some commies working for Bernie Sanders. And I'm not at all surprised by this. I've covered this a lot on my channel over the last few years about how a lot of these left-wing shits, as I call them, the socialist hipster internet tabloids like the Young Turks and AJ Plus and Now This and BuzzFeed, BuzzFools, MoveOn.org. Oh, I gotta fight these babes, huh? A lot of these left-wing, the bread tubers, Kyle Kalinske, Sam Cedar, Jimmy Dore, and all the rest, they're all really comfortable with communists. They're all very comfortable. I mean, they praise Richard Wolff, the Marxist intellectual. That's what he calls himself, by the way. Richard Wolff. He calls himself a Marxist economist, so I'm not trying to use this as a smear. And I know, we talked about this on the DDV show a few weeks ago. Played this clip of Richard Wolff. He was talking to Michael Brooks. I can't remember if it was the Sam Cedar show or the Michael Brooks show. Doesn't matter, though. But Richard Wolff he's an economist, by the way, again. He was talking about how the death counts, the death tolls from purges and famine in communist countries like the Soviet Union and Maoist China and all the rest, he doesn't find those a particularly useful metric. This is an economist. He doesn't find death tolls as a result of famine and purges a useful metric when assessing an economy. And this is someone that's highly respected amongst these shits. Again, Kyle Kalinske calls him a brilliant economist. He's been on the Young Turks numerous times. He's on Michael Brooks, Sam Cedar show all the time. You got this goof, Nathan J. Robinson, who runs what I call Commie Affairs. It's called Current Affairs, but he actually wrote a pretty telling article a couple years ago. It was called The Difference Between Liberals and Leftists, which I think his assessment's pretty fair. He said that liberals see capitalism as a machine that occasionally needs to be repaired and upgraded and changed. Whereas leftists, like Nathan J. Robinson, they see capitalism as a death machine that needs to be smashed to bits. Anyway, this is a guy that's often praised by the shits like Kyle Kulinski, and he was just on Sam Cedar show last week talking about why people should be a socialist. Hassan Proletariat Piker, I think he's described himself as a Marxist-Leninist before. This guy had he's making what, $60,000 a year at the Young Turks until recently? Guy that uses communist propaganda imagery in his little Twitter avatars. I mean, he called his show on the Young Turks agitated propaganda, and he said that he borrowed that term from the Soviet Union. You look at Democratic Socialists of America, which I've discussed before, openly praising Marxism. In fact, I think Cornel West, the Harvard intellectual, I think he's a member of DSA, if I recall correctly. And a lot of their chairs, a lot of members inside of DSA have said that communism is a good idea, and this is an organization that that AOC was a member of, a dues-paying member of. Remember, another telling thing about Kyle Kulinski is when he was at Politicon, he was on this panel with these other left-wingers, and he said something like, he was bragging about how Justice Democrats, which is the political action committee that Kyle helped found, he's bragging about how many Democratic Socialists, Justice Democrats, helped get elected. This guy that, I'm not a Democratic Socialist, I'm not a socialist, I'm a social democrat, I'm just a populist left kind of guy. I'm not too radical. And then he brags about all the Democratic Socialists he gets elected. Yeah, okay. The point of all this is that I'm really not surprised if Bernie Sanders, maybe you could maybe say it happened by accident. Maybe he's not the one really hiring these people, doing his due diligence or whatever, but I mean, if all these shits like Cenk Uygur and all the other so-called moderate progressives, if they're all comfortable hanging out and palling around and playing grab-ass with commies and Marxists, then why would Bernie Sanders be any different? Bernie Sanders would probably rather pal around with Marxists like Richard Wolff. That was another thing, current affairs. I was talking about that earlier. Current affairs. The gubernatorial candidate, Abdullah El-Sayed, who ran for governor in Michigan in 2018, he was running for the Democratic primary for governor, and I think even Bernie Sanders and AOC both came to Michigan to campaign for this guy. It was shortly after AOC pulled off her upset, then she showed up in Michigan campaigning for Abdullah El-Sayed. And a lot of the millennials like this guy, because he was going to bring about Michicare, Medicare for all in the state of Michigan. And he was a Bernie Sanders guy. And now he's making videos for Current Affairs, which is a Marxist, hardcore left-wing outlet, magazine, whatever you want to call it. They have a magazine, but they also have a YouTube channel and all that crap. Yeah, that's right. Go down. So yeah, it doesn't surprise... Bernie Sanders would probably rather pal around and play grab-ass with commies and Marxists than he would successful business people like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. And these are both liberals, Democrats. Bernie Sanders would probably rather pal around with Richard Wolff than, I mean, he already does with Linda Sarsour, doesn't he? Feel the burn! We were just talking about Bernie Sanders. Can you believe that shit? This girl's a communist. Hell yeah. No communism today, bitch.